Hello and welcome to Books from Your Therapist, a podcast where we talk to therapists and mental health practitioners about their mental health related book recommendations. By mixing book talk with mental health, we hope to open up the conversation around books your therapist may have suggested and make them more accessible.
This podcast is not a substitute for mental health care. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm Amanda Throckmorton, a marriage and family therapist in California.
And I'm Tara Kremen, and I work in the book industry in Toronto, in Canada. In this episode, we're taking a little bit of a different angle with mental health and talking to Jess Barton, a research coordinator at the Centre for Youth Bipolar Disorder. Jess conducts research amongst youth with or at high risk of developing bipolar disorder, and it was really interesting to get insights from a different side of work within the mental health field. We chat to Jess about the books Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker and Bravey by Alexi Pappas.
In Why We Sleep, neuroscientist and sleep expert Dr. Matthew Walker provides an in-depth exploration of sleep, examining how it affects every aspect of our physical and mental well-being.
The second book we discuss, Bravey, is a memoir from Olympian Alexi Pappas, who fearlessly and honestly shares her battle with post-Olympic depression and describes how she emerged on the other side as a thriving and self-actualized woman, a bravey. It was a really good conversation, and we hope that you enjoy.
Hello and welcome, Jess. Was wondering if you could just share a little bit about, who you are, your name, pronouns, any part of your identity you'd love to share.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jess. I identify as she, her, and I am from New Zealand originally, lived for a short stint in Ireland, and now I live in Toronto, Canada.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work in the mental health space?
Sure. So I work here in Toronto at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health at the Centre for Youth Bipolar Disorder. So we're a centre, clinical and research, who focus on youth bipolar disorder. So I help conduct the research and also carry out diagnostic interviews. So the whole point of the clinic is we have kids coming in to be assessed for bipolar disorder due to being high risk, whether that's because they've had a mood episode, which could reflect bipolar, or they have a family history of bipolar disorder, as bipolar disorder is incredibly genetic. So they come into the clinic, I do like a day-long assessment with them. We assess for comorbids, all the different function, quality of life scales, and then I meet with the psychiatrist who gives his diagnosis. And then we also have a bunch of research studies that these youth can all participate in. All youth can now. We've actually opened it up. So there's psychiatrically healthy controls and then youth with or at high risk for bipolar disorder. So in these studies, we look at brain functioning, blood vessel functioning, cognitive functioning, because we've found that a link between bipolar disorder and cardiovascular disease. So we're trying to investigate what is going on there, what is happening with that link. We also look at genetics, because again, it's very genetic. And then we also have some dialectic behavioral therapy studies as well, and then some exercise ones as well. So yeah, then the youth can just come in and we conduct all these studies and just long story short, just trying to get a better understanding of bipolar disorder, especially in youth, so that we can help them live their lives to the fullest as they grow older. We also do a lot of youth engagements. So we have a lot of patients who help collaborate with research proposals we write and things like that, advise on any new studies we start. And then they did a really cool thing where a few years ago, these youth all wrote a book. It's on our website, which I can give at the end, but it's called Never Alone, and it's a book written by youth with bipolar disorder for youth with bipolar disorder. So it's just, if there's any youth going through it, then they can read and be like, oh, okay, like what I'm going through isn't, I'm not alone. Long story.
Wow. Yeah, wow. That's so interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of things in-house, right? Like I heard research, studies, and then also access to use a DBT services. Yeah. That's a lot sort of in one organization. What fascinating sort of work. How did you end up there?
So I had a background in psychology, and then I went and did my master's in health psychology in Galway in Ireland. And then when I got to Toronto, there was a lot more opportunities here in research, and so I just applied for any research jobs I could get, and then I got the one at Centre for Youth Bipolar Disorder, and it fitted really well for me. I also got to like write papers and everything, which was a really big goal of mine. So yeah.
So you sort of went it sounds like the bread and butter for you is the research avenue, where for other folks it might be face-to-face work, but it sounds like you kind of do a mixture of both if you're leading studies. How is that for you to kind of get both of those?
Yeah, it's cool because I feel like if I was just doing the research, you'd kind of miss a bit of the human aspect of it. So yeah, getting to actually see the impact that bipolar is having on these kids, because you're doing day-long interviews with them and with their parents and talking to them about the mood, suicidality, like really difficult things, and getting to see that firsthand is just amplifies how even more important the research is, because you're seeing it and it's heartbreaking, and it gives more meaning to the research for sure.
Yeah, I imagine there's an aspect to it that's quite heavy. What parts of it do you enjoy? Is it like, you mentioned a little bit of the research and sort of the human aspect, but were there any things that surprised you that you've been like, wow, I didn't know I would be into this?
One thing I find really cool now that I've been there for 4 years, we moved hospitals and part of it was the pandemic. So like the face-to-face stuff has only been for the last few years. But there are kids that came into the clinic and I did their initial assessment with them however many years ago. And you see them coming in now and they walk past your office and they're like saying hi and they're like doing so much better. And it's super cool to see because you're like, wow, this kid was like, in a really bad state, like multiple suicide attempts type of thing, and then they're living this like really full and whole life, and it's really cool to see, like just see it firsthand. You can hear all the stories like that, but just to see it and be like, wow, that's crazy. Like that kid, I've been working like seeing that kid so much for 2 years and just seeing how far they've come and everything. It's not that I'm surprised, didn't think that I just hadn't like anticipated that. Is really cool to see.
That's so interesting because I imagine a lot of research. I guess I shouldn't say a lot of research, but when I picture research, I picture it being sort of like a slow process. So I think it's cool to be able to see actual change within a couple years. How is that for you to see? Like you said, like maybe that was a surprising aspect, but did that feel surprising as well?
Yeah, I mean, like especially because so like DBT studies is like they're being carried out by the therapists, and those are it's like they're getting a lot of therapy through that, but I don't see that. I just do the research assessments for that, so I'm not there like delivering it, and so it's even more of a surprise because I don't like I'm just seeing all these benchmarks, and then to actually see the improvement is it's really cool.
And any advice for anyone that's interested in research, like that maybe is, studying psychology or interested in mental health and maybe is like, oh, maybe research is the avenue for me?
Yeah, it's definitely about like getting your foot in the door for sure. From my undergrad, I was always like working on labs, helping out in labs. It might be uncomfortable to have to put yourself out there. Like the first research job I got, I was back at my hometown, Dunedin, in New Zealand, and my friend was like, I just come back from Ireland, I think, and my friend was like, just email people at the university and ask them. And I was like, okay. And then, I got like it was like very like 10 hours a week type thing for a few months, but that gets you the foot in the door. And so just putting yourself out there and reading about research you're interested in, and just
That's super cool. I love hearing you talk about the work that you're doing. Your passion certainly comes through from it, and it must be really motivating, as you said, to be able to like see those changes in the work that you're doing. It's like so impactful. Is there anything else before we jump into your book picks that you'd like to share about yourself, professionally or personally?
only because it's going to come up for one of them, but I'm very much a runner as well, and that's going to come up later. So just a heads up.
An avid runner, I would say.
Yeah, it's a bit of a big thing for me, but yeah.
All right. Well, then let's maybe jump into your first book pick, which is Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. Why did you decide to choose this book?
So I've always obviously had a fascination with human function and human biology. I've always found sleep a really interesting thing. I remember at high school learning that there were certain hours at the night that your skin repaired, and having gotten sunburn because I lived in New Zealand, and my sunburn peeling the next day because I didn't sleep during those hours, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then going on to neuropsych cognition to learn how important it is forming memories and everything. I remember learning how driving when you're really tired can be just as bad as driving drunk. It can have just as bad of an effect. And so yeah, it's just such an important marker of health. And nowadays, everything's go society's there's more of a highlight on sleep now, but a few years ago it's all how can we optimize everything, and sleep hasn't really been prioritized, but it is such a huge marker of something else going on, especially in the mental health field. Such a common marker and symptom of numerous diagnoses: anxiety, PTSD, and then obviously depression and bipolar. It's a marker, and then it can make these things for us as well. And for bipolar, sleep's also a really big aspect of it in both the hypomanic and the depression phases. So obviously with depression, there's insomnia and hypersomnia, so problem sleeping and then sleeping a lot more. And then in the hypomanic periods, there's the reduced need for sleep. And that can often be one of the first markers of a hypomanic or manic episode. I'm kind of starting. It's just these reduced need for sleep. So it's it's a really important marker for disorders like that as well. And then yeah, obviously I've written a paper on it as well, so slightly biased too, but yeah.
Yeah, you're speaking to such a good point. I think sometimes if sleep is not being asked about in the mental health setting, there's just so much you miss from that, or a misdiagnosis can happen, right? Or, I think it's not always the main thing people come in with symptom wise or what they want to talk about first, right? So that does feel so important to make sure you're kind of checking in on. And yeah, I just think it's interesting. It's, I know this book is a couple years old, but I agree with you. I think there is this sort of big overall holistic look at all of who we are entirely, and sleep is obviously such a huge part of that. What are some of the main takeaways you got about sleep from this book?
I think overall the multifaceted importance of sleep, it has so many different, as we see in the book, it has so many different affects us in so many different ways, and it's so important. It's how we spend probably not 50% of our time, but a lot of our time. And it's kind of not so much simple, but in a world where now it's we're wanting all these hacks, spending all these monies on all these hacks to be able to be better at everything. And in the running world, people will spend all this money on expensive shoes or recovery equipment, and it's just get back to the pillars, sleep. It's just one of the most important pillars, and just get back to that. And then I also found really interesting that mental health and cardiovascular discussions as well, the impact of how much it had an impact on that, especially because for us, we look at bipolar and cardiovascular disease as well. So seeing that it's impacting both of those, and then it's kind of gives more reason for us to be doing this research if it's impacting both. And this is something that these are both things that people are at high risk of having both of these together, then yeah, even more reason to be looking into that and see what's going on and what we can be addressing from a professional aspect.
There's tons of research that goes into this book, and I liked how every chapter is sort of laid out, so you can just pick it up and be like, okay, this is the chapter about Oh, now I'm blanking, but this is the chapter about, sleep in your working life, or this is the chapter in this, so you can kind of like not necessarily have to read the entire thing. But so I'm curious on two things, kind of like, did the research in this, does it inspire your work in that you're doing as well in kind of like keeping and maintaining being a research coordinator? And then I'm also curious about your paper. Did you write it before reading this? Is it related? Or like was the book sort of something you came across afterwards?
Well, yeah, it definitely like inspires my work. I love reading like these kinds of books, and as like a researcher, it's cool to see all these papers like come together and actually like show some patterns, which is like what we need to be able to create, like any evidence-based treatments or anything. So that's super cool. When I read any books like this, I'm like, oh, I want to I want to write a book like this. Like it's just really cool for me. Yeah, and it's cool to, yeah, like I said, see it all come together. I can't remember what came first out of writing my paper and reading this book, but I think they were probably around the same time. Papers like take a while to write, well, when I do them. So there's probably read this like during it.
A lot of this book uses science and data collection to highlight the negative impact of sleep deprivation, including higher risk of Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, like you mentioned, mental health challenges like anxiety and depression. As someone that's not more research based, sometimes this much information can feel kind of overwhelming for a reader. And as we know, information isn't always enough to change behavior. Do you have any sort of suggestions for readers when approaching this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think also just like taking into account like where you can be in the world, what your personality traits are. I remember when I first got a Fitbit and it would give me a like sleep score, and then I'd just obsess over it. And then I wouldn't sleep as well because I'd be stressed out about it. And I was just like, okay, well, like this isn't helpful for me. And so just like, oh yeah, meeting yourself where you're at, being like, okay, like what works for my life? I don't need to try and implement all of these things, but maybe I can implement a few of them. And like, what are your goals? Like if you're wanting to be a world-class runner, then you're going to need to like prioritize your sleep. But you also want to be prioritizing like your quality of life, what's going to make you happy. I prioritize sleep, and then I'll go off and do like multiple day long ultra relays where I don't sleep for 3 nights in a row. And well, I try, but I'm in an RV, so it doesn't really happen. But that's because that's what I want to be doing and that's what I love to do. And then I'll, recover from that, and that's fine. I'll set my life up accordingly around it. And I'm going to have much better experiences much more memorable experiences from, doing something like that makes me really happy, as opposed to just being like, no, I'm not going to do that because I need to get like my 8 hours of sleep or 12 hours of sleep. I also think that things like anything in the science world, I'm kind of passionate on like the fact that everyone should have access to the knowledge about it. Everyone should have access, be able to be educated on it, have access to it, and you can do whatever you want with it. Like it's your life, you can do what you want, but I think everyone should have equal access to everything, and then everyone can make, their own decisions from there. And then also, if you are someone that's predisposition, say you have like bipolar, you have mental health, like any mental health problems, anything like that, then maybe being like, okay, well, I need to pay a bit more attention to my sleep or to my nutrition or exercise or lowering stress, just because then I can improve my life. But I don't need to be like really rigorous about it, but like just being mindful of it, like knowing yourself, knowing your triggers. It's not just sleep that's going to cause, say, like with like bipolar disorder, there's a lot of different things that come into this analogy of a trolley going down a hill. It's not just going to be one thing that's going to cause it. So like just getting one bad night of sleep is also not going to like completely blow your world apart. So just, yeah, in moderation, meet yourself where you are.
I was curious if you were going to mention the relays because I thought about that when I was reading the book about sleep, and I'm like, knowing that to give you context, Amanda, Jess every year runs from Toronto to Montreal. like, which is, I don't even know how long. It's
Wow.
so
Yeah.
long. But knowing that you don't get a lot
Wow.
of sleep. But that's great to hear you speak about it, that like you're like, I know this is important to me and I'm going to achieve it, and like therefore can build up and then recover afterwards. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So this book has many helpful suggestions that the author offers around like organizational and legislator and personal change to support better sleep hygiene. You gave some tips there, but is there any other actions that sort of stood out to you that people could kind of take on board from reading this?
I think like just the like no screens or no phones before bed is a huge thing. Like I don't have my phone in my bedroom anymore when I go into bed. And it helps me so much. It's just like we have access to everything from there, and I think it's just important to, I mean, obviously, as the researchers also said, like the blue light, like, you know, also activates and you can't sleep, but also just to be able to like shut out the world and not, yeah, like be able to be like, okay, it's time to sleep. And yeah, having a routine. I love it, like chamomile tea before bed and a book is like my favorite thing. But yeah, I think those were just the biggest things that stood out to me.
It was kind of funny at the end of the book where the author does talk about the use of technology for sleep.
Mm.
And like even mentions that it's kind of like maybe a little counterintuitive to like the no technology piece. But what were your thoughts on that? The sort of like how technology can evolve? I think it was more about like different light filters, so it's not as jarring. Kind of tailoring your the temperature of your room to the person's temperature to make it more optimal for sleep and things like that.
Yeah. I I mean, it's interesting too when it's like we're trying to get back to like one of the most basic human things which existed without any of that, but then now we're living in a world which doesn't exist in that way. So, yeah, it's interesting. Like the lights and like those kinds of things, I'm always like intrigued about that. I mean, I hope they don't because I use like an e-reader and everything at night. But yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where it goes as well. But again, it's just like, are we getting too like obsessive about it, too like far from what it is? It's just sleep, and it should just, like I was saying earlier, with like my first Fitbit story. Then it's like, are we getting even more stressed out because we're like, okay, everything has to be completely perfect. And then if it's not, what happens? Like if we can't get the temperature to the perfect thing, like what's going to happen? Like, so yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see where it all goes.
You did mention one of the things you do, which is try and keep a sleep routine, which in the book, actually at the end of the book, there are, I think, 12 actionable steps to sort of help with someone's sleep routine and sleep process. And I think what's interesting too is like what we mentioned is this book is it's sort of like a buffet where you don't have to read the whole thing. You can actually pick different chapters, right? So if someone is reading this and they're like, okay, the science behind, the connection to Alzheimer's, like, I don't feel connected to that. Like, to your point, you can find the things you feel connected to. At the end, there's this helpful guide that's like, here are the 12 things that you can do sort of every day personally to help with sleep. And as you mentioned, and actually what he says is if you do one of these, it is to stick to a sleep schedule. So try to go to sleep the same time every night and wake up every single night, including the weekends, right? So that was one of them that you had mentioned. Another one I thought was sort of interesting was the impact of alcohol on sleep, right? We have all these stories about having a nightcap and how that's supposed to help you fall asleep. And, he mentions like maybe that does calm you down, but you're not actually able to reach REM sleep when you have alcohol in your system. You're more likely to wake up, right? You're just getting lighter sleep as throughout the whole night, right? When you have any alcohol. Another one that I liked was, obvious. Some of them are kind of obvious, like avoid caffeine and nicotine for up to 8 hours
The
before.
caffeine was so intense, though. The book was like,
Did you think so?
never have caffeine.
Right.
But it also made me consider like other sources of caffeine that aren't just like, I think in my mind, I just associate it with coffee. And it's like, no, there's like chocolate or like other like soft drinks that could have it. So that popped out to me. But yeah, I thought he was a little bit like caffeine is the worst.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like and I think he's giving you all of the research. And so I felt like he tended towards like abstinence for all of these things, right? And it's like, to your point, Jess, like what works for your lifestyle, right? Like take the parts that actually stand out to you and focus on those, right? Like for me, I actually have a really hard time sleeping. So, he mentions don't lay in bed awake for too long. Like if it takes 20 minutes and you're still awake, like get up and do something to kind of help calm yourself and then try again, right? It's like I've spent so many nights laying in bed for hours, right? Like I never would have thought to get up and, and do something to kind of come back and try again. So I do think there are helpful tips. And like we said, like you can read this like a buffet. You can just choose the chapters that actually feel approachable and interesting to you.
Mhm.
It sounds like you have a pretty solid sleep routine already, Jess, maybe because of some of like the research that you've done. But when you read this, did it influence any changes that you had to your routine?
The springs was probably like the biggest thing for me. And then like with the alcohol, it's interesting from with like smartwatches, the data on it when you've had like when your sleep data and heart rate data and everything when you've like drank alcohol as well is really interesting because it's just like your body isn't properly recovering and it's really interesting to see. You're like, oh wow, like you might not have even had that much, but like you can see it's like having an impact on your body as well.
Well, I hope we all have a better night's sleep having read this book.
I liked the piece about lowering the lights because I joke that I'm allergic to overhead lighting. I hate overhead lighting and I always have lamps on all day and it drives my partner nuts. But now I'm like, look, I'm doing everything I need to create the perfect environment for sleep. I'm helping myself calm down and be ready for sleep. So now I have the science behind me on that one.
Perfect.
My favorite part of the introduction was just where the author was like, I'll never be offended if this book puts you to sleep. In fact, I encourage it. So, like, I thought that was really funny, especially because it was so kind of research heavy and
Yeah.
like the self-awareness, and then also just being like, yeah, we all need to get more sleep, though.
Yeah.
So, who do you think would most benefit from reading this book?
I think anyone really. Like it's super important, obviously, for people that have like any health conditions, not just mental health as well. Like sleep, super important, super restorative. I would say, as opposed to like for the youth with bipolar, probably more like their parents, because I don't, I'm not sure if youth would be so interested in a book like that. But like you were talking about like the routine and everything, and like especially in adolescence, that's when like sleep is incredibly crucial. And so like and that disruption to the sleep routine is also big then too, because and often their circadian rhythms naturally they want to sleep later, and then on the week, they have to get up early for school, and then they sleep later on the weekends and everything. So like that they have that real disruption as well. But yeah, obviously probably the parents would be more interested. So yeah, like parents of or any like caregiver of any youth who's like experiencing any mental health issues as well, because like you say, it's like a buffet and you can pick what you want from the book, and yeah, super important for them, I think. And then just anyone in general who just wants to read a bit about some research about the importance of sleep, how to better sleep. Yeah, I think again, even though I just said it, but like you said, the buffet aspect of it is really good. And I like that with a lot of science books like that, is that I can just go back and I have some that I'll go back in and read like 5 times, but just read like very specific parts of them. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a permanent bedside locker book, I think, for
Yeah.
sure. And yeah, I think the parents of caregivers, that might be a really important parents, caregivers or parents of younger people, because the book really highlighted that we disregard it as we age. So I think it would be probably a lot of like, we're not, doing what we preach. So it might kind of rejolt some better routines.
Mhm.
So let's move on to our second book pick. So this is the book of your choosing, which is Bravey, Chasing Dreams, Befriending Pain, and Other Big Ideas by Alexi Pappas. So why did you pick this book?
Firstly, well, not obviously, because no one that's listening knows yet. She's a runner, but she's an Olympic runner. I actually got to meet her. We do another relay where we run from LA to Vegas that we've done a few times. And one year in Vegas, there's like a big pool party at the end. And I was like to my now husband, I was like, oh my gosh, that's Alexi Pappas. And he's like, yeah, of course. He's like, knows everyone in the running room. Of course it is. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I went and got to meet her, which is really cool. But yeah, I really liked this book. I found it was just such an interesting intersection of like running and also mental health and also just like motivational advice, and just her writing was also really good. I really liked the start. Like I read it because I think it had been recommended in like a running book club, and then I started reading it and I was like, oh wow, like quite surprised by like the mental health and everything at the start, with her mum dying by suicide. And I found her depiction of like mothers and children, I found like really interesting because it's something I've never thought about, and the fact that she'd just notice every mother and child, and they'd just be doing anything like feeding ducks or whatever, and she'd just be like, I just wish that I could be like that child being there. And it was just, yeah, it was a super interesting like aspect as well, that yeah, like I've never, seen, like heard it described from that aspect, which was really interesting. Yeah, I also just liked her, narrative of like how we can be striving towards a goal, we can be working really hard towards that goal. And like we all know, like if we don't reach that goal, like it can really suck. But then also the impact of when we do reach that goal, when we haven't like set up for what's next, and then like that can be really hard too. And so for her, then she like experienced some really bad depression and everything. And I just also liked the fact that it was like she's an Olympian. She's someone that people would see as like at the top of their game and everything, and just like that vulnerability that she shared. There's a more of a movement of it now as well, with Simone Biles and everyone, but just this movement of being like these Olympic athletes who are at like the top of their career, like they have mental health too. And this, they're just like everyone else. They have mental health too, and they need to also be prioritizing that. And so I really liked it for that as well.
I think for memoirs, you could tell that she had a background in writing. I think she talks about kind of like having a distinction of like maybe going into poetry and then
Yeah.
actually deciding to become a runner while she is fit and able and like extremely talented at it. But so I think Bravey comes from one of her poems, but she defines the term Bravey as a combination of bravery and being true to oneself. It's about embracing vulnerability, confronting fears, and staying authentic despite challenges. Alexi sees it as a way to navigate life's difficulties with courage and self-compassion. Courage is empowering, but oftentimes having self-compassion feels like the bigger challenge. Are there ways that you show yourself self-compassion in your everyday life?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just like obviously being kind to yourself, focusing on like what really matters, and then also bringing like, which I like how she always does, is there's like a side of like playfulness, joy into things. So like for instance, with running, like there's always a goal that you're wanting to go towards, a goal you're always wanting to reach, and that it can take courage to reach for that goal. But then what's even more important is the self-compassion when you don't. And that's when like the negative self-talk, the negative everything can come in. And for me, stepping back and being like firstly, I'm the only person that's this upset about this. Like nobody else cares as much. Everyone else just cares that like I'm happy, and it's, and that's all that matters. And so just like, yeah, taking a step back and yeah, being like, also just like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I love it? Then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how I perform. Obviously it does, but just being kind to yourself about how you perform, like choosing to be proud of yourself regardless of whatever the results are, the same in any aspect of life. It's scary putting yourself out there, but just being able to, yeah, be kind to yourself, whatever results you get back. And that, like, it's not an indication of your worth or anything. It's just your interpretation of the information that's being received back to you.
Alexi also, talks a lot about how challenging it was for her to be injured. And if anyone that's listening's ever been injured, I think especially as we get older, I find it so difficult mentally and emotionally to be injured and sort of be, being cut off from the things we do every day that are resourcing for us, right? Do you have any tips for staying strong mentally when injured?
Yeah, so I think it's also an interesting crossover with like in terms of the sleep stuff too, and just in terms of like how like everything has an impact on everything else, if you're mentally not feeling as great, then like your body's going to find it harder to recover from an injury type thing as well. And then there's kind of just a spiral effect of those things. But yeah, I think an important thing is remembering like what your why is, what makes you happy, like not letting your whole self-worth be tied into like that one thing. You're not defined by your running. There are other things that like you can be doing, and finding those things, finding things that like new things that bring you joy, and then finding like, there could be really cool things that come out of that. So like taking moments to really like be present in those moments where you're learning new things or whatever. There's been times when I like was back home and I like did a race and it didn't go well, and then but I was like, well, actually I was really upset by it, but then later I was like, well, actually I got to spend amazing time with my family, like that we wouldn't have been in that area otherwise, like we wouldn't have been, it was really, really special time. And so I think also just like uh, being present in like the new moments, the new memories that like you can be experiencing, especially because you're not just like focusing on the fact that you can't do something, you can't exercise or you can't do this, there are other things you can do. At the end of the day, you want to be remembering the good memories as opposed to just sitting there thinking about what you can't be doing.
What you're speaking to sort of reminds me of, I think sometimes when we have a goal, we can sort of have tunnel vision towards that goal, right? And as you were speaking, I was picturing like, okay, here's this goal, but then what if I open my view to see like the other, the other road, the other side of the road, the mountains around the road, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it's sort of expanding your viewpoint to say like, okay, here's this goal, but what have I been shutting out? And not taking into consideration why, like by being present, like here I am traveling to this new place for this race, right? Like that's such a good piece of advice, I think, for people that, pursue passions and are very focused on that. And I think Alexi, does a really great job in this memoir of embracing vulnerability and offering motivational insight while also staying authentic to herself. I liked the piece about being in high school. And I think in a lot of high school athletes might, understand this from a real place of being maybe forced to go into a certain sport when she was like, I still want to play soccer, right? Like I still want to do these other things. And so I like that she shared that piece of how challenging that was and how she resisted it and kind of stayed authentic to where she was on her own journey, right? Like she eventually did focus on running, but she kind of needed that other experience to feel into what she wanted to focus later on. Do you have any advice for young people, maybe young female athletes, on how to navigate the outside pressures of pursuing their passion while staying authentic and in touch with themselves?
Yeah, I mean, like, firstly, we see that a lot in like sports and things too, is that when kids, if, you know, when they're younger, if they're forced into doing like a specific sport, it often doesn't go well. It leads to burnout. Whereas the kids that have like a more varied plate of sports that they're engaging in are more likely to then want to go and pursue whichever one they want. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just remembering your why and what you're wanting to be doing, why you're wanting to be doing that, whether it's a hobby or a profession, like you're choosing and you get to do this. You know, maybe that means every now and then taking like a week off of not, like, say, maybe not uploading your run to like Strava, which is like social media for runners, or like taking a week off where you're just running by yourself and you're not looking at statistics, you're not like obsessing over everything, just like knowing when there's like triggers that are causing you stress and to just take that time out to get back to like who you truly are. You know, for me, it's like I want to just go, I will take a week off and go like run in hills, run in trails, like that's what I grew up in. And just being like that brings me joy. And yeah, just going back to, yeah, remembering, it's kind of like the whole inner child and everything, you know, like remembering what brings that joy, what brings you joy, because in the end of the day, that's going to be the thing that you have longevity for, is whatever you have passion for. And yeah, just being true to yourself. Definitely seeing quite a movement of like female runners. I'm sure it's in other fields, but I live only in the running field. Really like opening up about this, like professional runners, a lot of them opening up about like mental health struggles, eating disorders and everything. The eating disorders and things is really, it's cool to see, because there was now there's a movement that it's like you don't need to be tiny, you don't need to be really skinny to be a fast runner. And then like, so these people opening up are allowing the like younger athletes to kind of have an understanding of being like, okay, well, like, you know, what do I actually want to be? And it kind of just gives them space to be able to navigate and figure out what they want to be.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Olympians specifically, and how, you know, I think when I was younger, I almost saw them as gods, right? You see them as these otherworldly, not even people almost, because of how high achieving they are. And, you know, I think that is really shifting, kind of actually with social media and TikTok, where these Olympians are kind of sharing these other parts of their personality that are really humanizing them. And I think it is so important. I think it's amazing to see them share their struggles, because that's not the idea of the Olympians that I had when I was a young girl growing up. I thought it was all perfection, and I didn't see the vulnerability there. So I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I think at the start of the book, she talks about how running is hard, and it's all about like it's meant to be hard, and it's about managing like how much I was gonna say hardness, but how much like toughness you can endure, you know? So even because I think me, from being outside the running world, like, because clearly you hear about that runner's high and like people getting a lot out of it mentally. So it was interesting to be in like an Olympian being like, no, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So it's
It doesn't get easier. You just, yeah, exactly. You get better at dealing with it, but it never gets any easier.
you guys make it look so easy sometimes, but well, speaking of runs, you talked about some ultra relays there, which are massive achievements, but what's been your most memorable run? And this doesn't have to be, maybe we can ask for more than one. It doesn't have to be like statistic driven, or what was just maybe something that was like a special run to you?
Yeah, the ultra relays are always really special. So there's obviously the main one, which run to Montreal, where we run from Toronto to Montreal. This was my third year doing it. My husband's the race director. And then we also did one this year in Europe, where we started in Strasbourg, went through Germany, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and ended in Innsbruck in Austria. But yeah, they're so you learn so much about yourself during them. And it's also, you're running through these like really like beautiful areas. I mean, Run to Montreal isn't as beautiful. There's one area, Long Sault Parkway, which is stunning, and I always make sure I have that. Like, it's like this little strip that goes out over the water, and I always make sure I have that. But you learn so much about yourself. And yeah, it's crazy because it's like you're not, you're running for how far, like 50 plus, around about 50 hours, not continuously. It's a relay, so someone in the team's always running, and you're not really sleeping. You're just trying to consume like the amount of calories to keep you going. And it's like in the area Longsword Parkway where I always take that section, it's always like the morning of the second day, and it's like the sun's come up and it's like beautiful, and it's like everything's changed. Like the night legs are just so hard, like they're horrible. Like you're like, we're just focusing on moving forward. And and then the sun comes up and it's like Longsword Parkway where it's all these trees, because it's always in fall, autumn. So I shouldn't say fall, my dad will be really disappointed in me. Autumn. And so all the leaves are changing color and it's out on the water and it's really peaceful. And it's like you have all this new energy, but you haven't slept or anything. It's just crazy because your mind is just like, okay, we must have all this new energy. And then, at the end where it's getting so tough, and just like the ability to like push harder and keep going. And it's pretty crazy, like the amount you can. Yeah. And then obviously the one in Europe was absolutely stunning as well, like we finished like coming in through the Austrian Alps, or through all these like tiny little villages in the Alps, and it's like a Sunday morning and everyone's wearing their like traditional outfits and everything. So like run through, be like, hi, don't mind me. Yeah, so that was like stunning as well. But yeah, those are definitely the most memorable. You learn so much about yourself, and then your team members from them, you have such close bonds with them and everything too. And yeah, it puts things in perspective too. Yeah.
I love that. That sounds great. I mean, I would never be able to do it, but it sounds beautiful. I feel like the team member part is probably something that's very encouraging. And Alexi's book actually talks about like mentorship, and she seems to be like such a strong mentor, and really, she gives a little bit of advice actually about like seeking out mentors.
Yeah.
Have you had a mentor, or/do you mentee?
Um, Not intentionally, but I feel like there's this one lady in the running in Toronto, and she was giving a speech recently, and she was like, you have an impact, like just everything you're doing like day to day. You don't know how you're impacting people. So like just by choosing to like be a female and be out there competing or doing anything, you're having an impact. And so yeah, I feel like and I have people, because I have friends that are all ages as well, I kind of feel like I wouldn't like define them as a mentor, but like they are. And then yeah, in terms of like mentees, I feel just like from my like behavior and how I like treat others, I can like, mentor them without like definitively mentoring them, but just like through my actions.
Nice, nice. So is there anything else that inspires you in particular from this book, Bravey?
I think we covered most of it. I like the like willpower budget thing she talks about, and thinking about things that are like willpower draining and willpower boosting, and like just again having gratitude to yourself. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today. I'm wondering, you spoke a little bit about your work in the beginning, but for listeners that are interested in that organization, or I don't know if there's a donation option as well, anyone that's interested in sort of supporting that work, can you share the name of it again and sort of where we can find that online?
Yeah, so the website would be long, but if you Google Center for Addiction and Mental Health and then Center for Youth Bipolar Disorder, and then there's a website there, and then that also has like the book written by youth as well and everything, and all the resources are there.
Great. And we'll include them in the show notes too, so people can find
Perfect.
them. Well, thanks so much, Jess.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for having
you.
me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to Books from Your Therapist. If you're interested in the books we talked about, we'll include links to them in our show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us with your own recommendations, or if you're a mental health practitioner interested in coming on to share, you can email us at booksfromyourtherapist@gmail.com.
Happy getting better sleep.
I know. That's the only thing I could think of. Happy get better sleep and dreaming of one day becoming an Olympian.
There we go.
Got it.